Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful to see you all here, and we are greatly looking forward to the talk and the discussion on the INA and Bose, and look forward to Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee taking us back to the 1940s. But before we begin and I introduce uh, Professor Mukherjee and Mr. Sanjeev Chopra, may I request Ambassador Shyam Saran, President of the India International Center, to say a few words.
Thank you, Raghavan. Let me first of all welcome Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee and my colleague Sanjeev Chopra to this afternoon session. I just wanted to give you just a backdrop to this particular festival that we are having. Every year that we have the festival, we try to build it around some important themes so that there is a certain coherence in the various programs. So this year, what we have called Kalpaviksha is really looking at the movement for India's independence, not only in its political aspect, but looking at this period as one of great sort of revival, resurgence, whether it is in terms of history writing, whether it is in terms of cultural renaissance, revival of the various classical arts. Not only just revival in a mechanical sense, but the revival in terms of reinterpreting them, creating them in a sense. And so there is a whole spectrum of events that we have for this festival. But of course, there is, with respect to this, period, there are some great, figures who contributed in a very, very, in a very substantial way to the fight for independence. And Subhash Chandra Bose, Rash Bihari Bose, people of that generation really had a very, very important role to play in some different ways. So we are really very fortunate to have a historian of Professor Mukherjee's stature, who will be talking to us about this fascinating period during of our history. So.
Thank you, sir.
I'm told that I should give this to you before. Thank you. Sanjeev.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Take a photo. Well, thank you very much, sir, and thank you also for focusing this festival on a particularly riveting period of our history. And I'm greatly looking forward to, as I'm sure all of you are, Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee's talk today. He, of course, needs no introduction. He is by far one of India's best known historians. His works on 1857 were transformative in many ways for, I think, now two generations of students of Indian history. But his subsequent works also, he has continued to write about 1857, and he had a new book comparing the different trajectories of Rani Lakshmibai and Rani Hazrat Mahal recently. But he has written on a wide range of other subjects, and I've recently read an overview, a book he co-authored, which gives an overview of Indian history from the earliest times, more or less up to the contemporary period, which is again a wonderful read and really a excellent exposition of how history can be written for the layperson by an accomplished professional historian. So we are fortunate that we have him to talk about Subhash Chandra Bose. We are also very lucky that we have Dr. Sanjeev Chopra uh, to act as the moderator today. Sanjeev had a very distinguished career as a civil servant in the Indian Administrative Service. He was director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration, and I, for one, know what a what a what a change he made to the academy at that time. And the joke amongst civil servants used to be that once in a decade, government makes the right decision in terms of appointing the right person for a particular job. So I think it was certainly that kind of decision where Sanjeev Chopra was concerned. He himself is a well-known author. He has written a wonderful book on the political geography of India, about how different states came to acquire the identities which they have. And he has a biography of Lal Bahadur Shastri, which is going to come out in a few months. So we are fortunate that he is going to be here as our moderator today. I think Subhash Chandra Bose is one of those riveting personalities who really dominate the first half of the 20th century in so many different ways. There's, of course, a India context, but there's also an outside India context. And when I was High Commissioner in Singapore, one of my most touching memories was of families, Indians who have been in Singapore for 100, 150 years, coming to call on the Indian High Commissioner to show some memento of their association with the INA. It could be a badge, it could be a curfew pass, a ration book, or a cap. But it was really for Indians in Southeast Asia in the 1940s and 50s. The exposure and the interface to Subhash Chandra Bose and the interface with the INA is a radical change in their political lives, because their political experience and their social experience changed completely because of that particular experience. So I won't say much about that, because we have an authority in the form of Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee to talk about Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA and the 1940s. Thank you very much, and over to you, Professor Bose. Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee. Sorry.
Thank you, Raghavan, and thank you, Chancellor, for inviting me this afternoon, and all of you for sparing a Sunday afternoon to come and listen to quote-unquote boring history talk. I must begin with the title, which I very deliberately chose, and I deliberately made it somewhat enigmatic. There are two Boses here. It's not the same Bose. The two Boses here are Rajbihari Bose and Subhash Chandra Bose. One is very well known, and I'm going to spend less time on the well-known Bose. He is a charismatic, if not an iconic figure, especially from the part of the world I come from. But very little is known about the other Bose, Rajbihari Bose, who was senior to Subhash Bose. Rajbihari Bose was born in 1886 and he died in 1945. Had a very checkered career. There is a convergence between the two Boses, which is a very late life convergence, late life for both of them, both the Boses. But their early lives are very, very different. Please indulge me, because I'm going to spend more time on Rajbihari Bose than on Subhash Bose. If you're going to be a little disappointed if you have come here to listen about Subhash Bose, because enough has been written about him. And enough, there are enough stories about him as well. Some of them true, some of them not so true. Rajbihari Bose, unlike Subhash Bose, was not born into privilege, either in terms of money or in terms of status. For one thing, he was a rural boy. He was born in Hooghly, brought up in Burdwan, two districts that were in the late 19th, early 20th century, tormented by malaria and floods. So these were two very important formative formative influences on Rajbihari Bose. Subhash Chandra Bose, as you know, all of you know, he was born into some kind of wealth. His father was relative affluence. His father was a very successful lawyer in Orissa, um, so wealthy that he could actually build a house in one of the very posh areas of Calcutta. Subhash Bose went to presidency, which he had to leave under some controversy. Went to Scottish Church College, outstanding student in matriculation in his BA, and then again when he went to Cambridge for his ICS examination, with which he did very well. He was at Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge, but he, as is well known, this is the first heroic gesture on Subhash Bose's part. He refused to take the ICS examination and the ICS posting, even though he had cleared the exam, cleared the writing test, cleared the viva, everything. He had the letter of appointment in his hand, and he refused to take it. And there's a marvelous anecdote that when he was going to post that letter of refusal in Cambridge, C.C. Desai, who was a very close friend and roommate or housemate of his, walked with him to the red pillar box, the post box, trying to persuade him not to post that letter. The irony of this anecdote is this, that because Bose resigned, didn't take the appointment, C.C. Desai came into the ICS because of that vacancy. So the other very important influence in Rajbihari Bose's life was he had a fascination for the events of the rebellion of 1857. Now, we are not quite sure where that fascination came from. He might have read the first book to come out in any Indian language on the rebellion of 1857, a book called Sipai Juddher Itihash, the history of the Sepoy War in the early 1880s by Rajanikanta Gupta. He also might have read a rather stirring essay that a 16-year-old Rabindranath Tagore wrote on the Rani of Jhansi. It's quite possible he read these because these were written in Bengali, and he got interested and fascinated by the rebellion of 1857. But the book that really became a kind of model for him about what to do against British rule came out in 1909. That is V.D. Savarkar's The Indian War of Independence. This kind of became it's a bad word to use in this context, but it became a kind of Bible for Rajbihari Bose. He read it many times and he was inspired by it. And of course, while he was growing up, when he was 20 years old or something, Bengal was enveloped by the Swadeshi movement. And as the historian Shumit Sarkar, in his magisterial book on the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, 1905-1907, has delineated this movement had 4 political strands in it, political/cultural strands in it, overlapping strands as well. And one of the strands was the idea of armed revolution or armed insurrection, that British rule could only be thrown out of Bengal. At that point, these people were only thinking about Bengal, and then later on about India as well, through the bomb and the pistol, the politics of assassination. Rajbihari Bose was drawn to this aspect of the movement rather than the other 3. The other 3 consisted of moderate politics, that is petitioning the government, the other being boycott, passive resistance, and the third represented by Tagore's quest for Atma-Shakti, or the inner strength to have the moral courage to oppose and overthrow British rule. Rajbihari wasn't drawn to these 3, he was drawn to this armed insurrection part of the movement. This fascination that violence is the only viable counterpoint to British rule in India marks his first entry point into the pages of history and the first milestone in a very checkered career. In December 1912, the then Viceroy of India, Lord Hardinge, and his wife made a state visit to Delhi. Delhi, the previous year, in a very grand darbar, had been declared to be the new capital of India by King Emperor George V. As Hardinge's ceremonial procession progressed down Chandni Chowk, and please remember that today's Chandni Chowk can in no way be compared to the Chandni Chowk of 1912. 1912 Chandni Chowk was actually described by a contemporary as one of the most majestic avenues in the whole of Asia. Difficult to imagine that now if you see Chandni Chowk today. The procession was proceeding down Chandni Chowk, Hardinge was atop an elephant, not just an elephant that Hardinge described as the biggest elephant he had ever seen in his life. A bomb was hurled at Hardinge. It hit the wooden panel of the howdah on top of the elephant, and the attendants that the Viceroy and the Viceroy were not hurt or even injured. They lost their hearing because of the blast, which could be heard for miles around. But the attendant who was holding the umbrella, the ceremonial umbrella over the Viceroy, died almost immediately. Even today, after all the investigations that have been carried out, we are still not 100% certain about who the perpetrators of this assassination were or was. The British carried out very detailed investigations, very detailed, using some of the more modern methods that were available then, but they couldn't really pinpoint who the assailants had been. They narrowed it down to two Bengalis, both of them from rural Bengal. One was a person who has now completely disappeared. We know nothing about him, Bashanta Kumar Biswas, and the other was Rashbihari Bose. Now, Rashbihari Bose must have had not nerves of steel, but nerves of titanium, because the next we hear of him is 2 days later, 2 days after the bomb had been hurled at Lord Hardinge, when Hardinge arrives in Dehradun to actually recover his hearing. He wants to rest in Dehradun and get well before he proceeds on the other destinations that he wanted to visit or did visit in 1912 across North India. When he visited, when he got down from the train at Dehradun station, a group of people greeted him in front of the station and performed salams. They saluted the Viceroy. The man who led the salute was none other than Rashbihari Bose. So if he indeed had been one of the assailants, it just shows what kind of nerves he had that 2 days later he had escaped from Delhi and 2 days later he was in Dehradun performing salams to the Viceroy. So that's why I deliberately use the phrase that this is the starting point of a very checkered career. Now we can come to the other parts of his career. Once World War I broke, 1914-15, the attention of British officials and particularly the attention of the police and the intelligence department of the colonial administration were focused on the war. At this point, because the attention was diverted, Rashbihari Bose and some of his friends planned a series of uprisings across North India replicating what had happened in 1857. Very detailed planning. But these uprisings were aborted because a double agent, who the Rushbury Bose and his comrades were unaware of, spilled the beans, and the colonial administration got to know that this was what was being planned. And from then on, Rushbury Bose was on the run. He became a fugitive of empire. He hid for a considerable period of time in Benares, then came to Calcutta, boarded a ship under an alias, and fetched up in Tokyo. And that's where he lived for the rest of his life, except for a brief period of travel in Southeast Asia to meet the younger Bose, to which I will come. But he lived in Japan, married a Japanese, so he almost lived there like a Japanese. But the point I want to make is not how Japanese Rushbury Bose became or didn't become, is the fact that in this act of going to Japan as a fugitive, the point I'm trying to make is not whether he became a Japanese or didn't become a Japanese, is that by this very act of fleeing from India and becoming a fugitive of the empire, Rushbury Bose freed himself from what the historian Tim Harper has very tellingly called the asphyxia of empire. He fled from this stranglehold of the empire, and he entered, to use another of Tim Harper's very telling phrase, he entered the world of underground Asia. Just want to talk a little bit, for the sake of context, about what is meant by underground Asia. This is a world, samizdat, as the Russians would later call it, the underground world, inhabited by revolutionaries. Constant revolutionaries of various strands and ideologies who were constantly on the move, traveling under aliases, forged documents, illicit currencies, illegal arms, and of course proscribed literature hidden in compartments in their suitcases. And they populated the underbelly of the great cities of Asia, the waterfront, the lodging house, the cafes or the coffee houses, and also some of them wrote for the clandestine presses in the alleyways of these great cities. There are many such very remarkable Asian individuals who are part of this underground world. I mean, the two most famous ones are the person who would later become Ho Chi Minh, and in India, M.N. Roy, Manavendranath Roy, who M.N. Roy is an alias. His real name was Narendranath Bhattacharya, who is the only person, if I'm not mistaken, who was actually present in 4 different socialist revolutions in the world: the Russian one, the Mexican one, the Chinese one, and the attempted Indian one. So, and for them, Japan was an important location because Japan was emerging as what was called the light of Asia, the only, as it was perceived then, only viable counterpoint to European dominance. As I said, Rushbury Bose spent the rest of his life there. He was an exile, of course, because even though the Japanese made him feel at home, his heart was in India and his head worked constantly to free India from British rule. Now, in India, again, to flog a horse that all of you know, by 1919, end of the First World War, nationalist mobilization, the nationalist movement had taken a different turn under Gandhi, and turned towards nonviolent mass mobilization. But Rashbihari Bose remained convinced that this was not the way to overthrow British rule or to fight British rule. So from Japan, he set up networks of like-minded people strung across the Asian seaboard to smuggle arms into India to reach the various underground groups committed to armed insurrection. This is a point that needs a little bit of emphasis because because of the emphasis that is often given in history writing on Gandhi's political mobilization, this strand of the Indian national movement does not receive the attention that the nonviolent strand gets to receive. Strong across various parts of India, particularly Bengal, Punjab, and Maharashtra, and even parts of South India, there were groups, underground groups, who were working to champion and carry out armed insurrection against British rule. This is a strand that runs, as I said, from the Swadeshi movement, Aurobindo Ghosh, his brother Barin Ghosh, Bhagajuddin Khudiram Bose in India, to Rashbihari Bose, Bhagat Singh, the Ghadar Party, and of course, uh, in a different way, to Subhash Bose as well, to which I will come in a minute. Rashbihari Bose actually, because of his organizational they spoke for an hour, and they spoke in Bengali, which is quite understandable. I mean, when two Bengalis meet, they hardly speak in any other language. So they spoke in Bengali. And later that year, in Singapore, and this is the only time that Raspberry Bose travels out of Japan to be with Bose in Singapore, but more than being with Bose, there was a very specific, significant thing that he wanted to do. He handed over the leadership of the Indian National Army in Singapore to Bose, saying, "This is my legacy to you. I am in failing health and I'm unable to travel out of Japan, so please take this forward, develop this fighting unit." But in the course of this meeting, this was their last meeting, he said two things. One is trivial, but nonetheless it's worth repeating that triviality. He said, "This will probably be our last meeting. I want to have a dinner with you. Can you arrange for a Bengali meal? I haven't had a Bengali meal for a very long time." And Subhash arranged that, and they met over this Bengali dinner, where, this is the most significant part of that last meeting, Raspberry Bose very bluntly told Subhash, "Give up the idea that the INA can fight the Allies and win. There is no way that this is going to happen." But Subhash was in no mood or not inclined to take this kind of practical advice. He built up, as we know, the Indian National Army as a fighting unit. He mobilized particularly the Indians that were there in Southeast Asia, largely Tamils. There were 10,000 people alone in Malaysia who were willing to join the Indian National Army to form a fighting unit. He trained them, and then, of course, as they say, the rest is history. With the Japanese army, he comes to the northeast of India and raises the tricolor in Imphal, however briefly. But there are some points that need to be noted in this almost incredible military advance of Subhash Bose's Indian National Army. One is the names he gave to his brigades in the Indian National Army. We all talk about the Rani of Jhansi brigade. Everybody talks about it. What were the other brigades called? Gandhi Brigade, Nehru Brigade, Azad Brigade. So here is somebody who was described by none other than Gandhi as a prodigal child of the Congress, or more specifically, my prodigal child, actually recognizing his Congress lineage and his Congress heritage. So he's unwilling to abandon the Congress completely. And the other is, of course, in the better known, the radio network is set up in Singapore, the Free India Radio. It's from there, in his very first broadcast over this radio, that he, for the very first time, he described Gandhi to be the father of the nation. The epithet father of the nation was not created or given by the Congress. It was given by somebody who is considered to be a rival, an enemy, whatever you want, of the Congress. Subhash Bose called Gandhi the father of the nation. And so it is as somebody who doesn't see himself from being completely cut off from the Congress, as part of the same movement, different boats, as Gandhi used to say. Subhash and I are sailing on two different boats, but the goals are the same. So he arrives in Imphal, raises the tricolor, and but in the war, both in the West and in Southeast Asia, has turned round completely, particularly after the entry of America post the bombing of the Pearl Harbor. And the Japanese are no longer, Hitler is being resisted, even in Soviet Russia. By May 42, it is very clear that he's not going to have a clean run over Soviet Russia as he expected. And in Southeast Asia, the Japanese are no longer on a winning streak. They are very much on the retreat with the entry of the US uh, and the British troops. In Imphal itself, Subhash's army and the Japanese army suffer a setback because on the other side, the British army, British Indian army, a lot of Indians were involved in that fighting force under Slim, also hold the line against the INA. But more importantly than that, in July, uh, the Japanese generals convey to Bose that the Imphal front is no longer viable. They have to retreat. So the INA and the Japanese army first, and then the INA begin this massive act of retreat from Imphal back into Southeast Asia. It's a very, very rough retreat for the INA soldiers because it's the monsoon, it's marshy land, they are plagued by malaria and cholera. There are women in the army, and I often think that this is probably the most heroic episode in Subhash's life, because those who were in part of that retreat remembered very vividly how, when there was a river to cross, he would always be the last to get on the raft or the makeshift boat. After his men had crossed, particularly the women would be the first, and then after all his men had boarded that boat or the raft, only then would he board that raft to take that crossing across the river. It was indeed very full of suffering, and Bose was a part of that suffering. One of those participants in that retreat was once asked in an interview, nothing happened. The INA was defeated or had to retreat, and you sacrificed your life for the INA. What did you get out of it? He gave a very moving reply. He said, Netaji embraced me. That's enough for me. So that's the beginning of this iconic status that Subhash Bose has come to acquire and become a part of the stuff that legends are made of. The other part of the legend, of course, is his quote-unquote death. Some people don't believe he died in that plane crash, which a plane that took off from Taiwan going to Japan. Subhash was a wanted man in Southeast Asia by this time. He had to get to Japan in one way or the other. And the two historians who have looked at the available documentary evidence, Subhato Bose and Brothers Against the Raj, what's his name? Lenny Gordon. Lenny Gordon actually interviewed the nurse and the doctor who looked after Subhash Bose when he had third-degree burns. And the evidence, that's how I put it as a student of history, the available evidence suggests that he did die as the effect of the burns that he suffered during the plane crash. But there are people who have very contrary arguments to this. And what about the other Bose? Tokyo, 1945, American bombers burning the city, bombing it incessantly, and that's where he died, not out of any bomb injuries or anything like that, out of sheer ill health. So that's how the two Boses entered history and exited from history. I want to leave this narrative with three issues, and they are somewhat controversial and debatable. One, I think, is a little bit of and I've already indicated that, a little bit of an irrelevant issue. That is, which of these two strands, the violent strand or the non-violent strand, is more important for the independence of India? I think it's not very relevant. Both were fighting for the independence of India and both contributed to the independence of India. I think that's my view. I don't think it is a comparison that can be made. The means were different, the end was not. The other thing that is two other things related actually. How far was it viable to think of a freedom of India that would come with a Japanese invasion? Would it have been any different from, would a dependence on Japan, would it have been any different from the kind of imperialism that the British, imperialist exploitation and oppression that the British had unleashed on India? We know now how oppressive, how cruel the Japanese had been in the course of World War II in Southeast Asia. And the third is more specific to Rashbihari Bose. Can you really mobilize the people of India through remote control sitting in Tokyo? With those parting provocations, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mukherjee. I should have mentioned at the beginning that apart from his reputation as a very accomplished historian, Professor Mukherjee also is a very great teacher. And we saw an example of that just now with this very dramatic and riveting story or narrative and all the drama associated with it, as also the general issues which arise from it, how wonderfully they were presented with a full understanding that this had to be completed in 30 minutes. So that is really the art of good teaching. And may I now hand over for his comments the floor to Sanjeev Chopra.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think we'll all agree that this was absolutely wonderful. We got a perspective of both the Boses. And I was allotted 10 minutes, but I'll try to finish in 5 to 7 because I find there are a lot of people here who've done a lot of work on the INA. My friend Sagrika has done a lot of work on the women who were in the INA movement, so I'll leave some time for her to ask some questions. When I was looking into this subject, I thought let's look into this very wonderful relationship which two great icons of India have had on each other's states, that is Bhagat Singh and Bose. Because there's a lot of appreciation for Bose in Punjab, and there's a lot of appreciation for Bhagat Singh in Bengal. And these are also the only two places where the All India Forward Bloc had some kind of a role, you know. And because when I was in Bengal, my minister was from the Forward Bloc, so he used to organize big celebrations on Bhagat Singh's birthday in Calcutta. So I was privy to the thing. But again, going back to history, the first person, I mean, let's look at the first Bose, that is Rashbihari Bose and his connection to Punjab. Rashbihari Bose, first, there's this Harding case, then the influence on the revolutionaries of Punjab is very prominent. But the other aspect was his impact on the Ghadar movement. His impact on the Ghadar movement was something which made him extremely acceptable to Punjab. You know, and this was something which is fascinating. It's an area that has not yet been explored to the extent it ought to be, because we all think about Hardayal and the Ghadar movement, but the role of Rashbihari Bose in the Ghadar movement is a very important role. Also, because I now come from Dehradun, and we know where he stayed in Dehradun. He stayed in the Khusi Gali of Dehradun. There's an attempt to sort of, you know, create a museum there, an attempt to name a road in the FRI after him. But that is one aspect of the discussion which he had, the impact that the elder Rashbihari Bose. The other very important thing is that in the first INA, as you mentioned, sir, and the first INA, one of the leading people was Mohan Singh, General Mohan Singh. Now, Mohan Singh had also was from Punjab. Mohan Singh was recruited as a Jawan, but because of his competence and his leadership abilities, he had been promoted as a Viceroy's commissioned officer. And he was the first person who took the leadership of the Indian National Army, that is the INA 1. Actually, there were two INAs, INA 1 and INA 2. The INA 1 started with Rasbihari Bose, and he had appointed General Mohan Singh. Now, Mohan Singh set up the forward bloc in Punjab. And therefore, this connection between the forward bloc of Bengal and the forward bloc of Punjab is a very interesting connection which I found, because this Mohan Singh had also set up a volunteer army. He had mobilized people and he had created a volunteer force. I mean, at that point of time when we were struggling with China, so he sort of got people to volunteer to fight the Chinese. So this was the forward bloc. Later he merged his forward bloc. One faction of the forward bloc had merged with the Congress. So Mohan Singh's faction of the forward bloc had been merged with the Congress, and he later became an MP. But at some point of time, he was as powerful a leader in Punjab as Sant Fateh Singh was. And those who are aware of Punjab, it would have been a different set of history if this particular strand of forward bloc in Punjab had taken that route. And of course, we know about the second INA, which Subhash Bose had taken over. The point which Professor Mukherjee made about how the leadership, how India would have fared under the leadership of Japan. From whatever little I've read about, I mean, whatever I could read, as far as the experience in Andaman and Nicobar Islands is concerned, it was terrible. I mean, the very first people who had supported the very first soldiers who were there, they were treated very badly. In fact, the experience of the Andaman and Nicobar Islanders, especially the Andaman people, from the Japanese was very brutal. It was, in fact, as recent scholarship shows, they were very, very brutal. So one is not very sure. Because if Andaman is if you look at Andaman's, because that's the only place where actually the Indian National Army and the Indian Independence League actually ran something called the government, then that experience was terrible. Terrible is the word. In fact, there's that Sunny's Mazar in Andaman, which is, they show that, this young boy, was Sunny, his sister had been brought out by the Japanese soldiers, so he protested. So in the village square, in the public square, his hands were twisted and he was shot dead. So that Mazar is still there. So that is one aspect about it which I thought I'll bring to your knowledge, to bring to the notice, thing. And then, the influence which Bhagat Singh had on Bengal is yet another aspect. In fact, the total number of people, and that brings me to another point which just came to me, is that, you see, areas which were directly under the British rule, they had more revolutionaries, because it was Punjab and Bengal, because these were states which were provinces of British India, which were being directly governed by the Britishers. All the large areas, because Baroda and Srinagar and many others, they did not produce the kind of revolutionaries which Punjab and Bengal and other parts brought out. Another aspect which I thought, is about the role, is about the friendship between Abdullah and our friend Subhash Bose. That also turns out to be a very interesting relationship, because Abdullah was inducted as the president of the All India States People's Congress by Subhash Bose under his presidency. I'll not speak more, because I'm sure there are many people here who would like to, to ask more questions from Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee. All I can say is that it's been a real pleasure listening to you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And I hope that in the course of our question answers, many more issues will be revealed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a few minutes for question and answers. So if there are any, please do identify yourself and try to make the question as brief as
I'll
possible.
suggest that Sagrika ask a few questions, because she has worked on this subject. Sagrika, why don't you come there? Or let me get your chair. Yeah, put your chair. So I've cut down 3 minutes of my time for you. Old times of India friendship, right?
Thank you, Sanjeev. First of all, I'm Sagari Chopra, so don't confuse me with the TMC politician. I am also very privileged to be asked to speak, because women are so easily marginalized and invisibilized. So thank you for your talk, but I don't agree that so much has been written and said about the Rani of Jhansi regiment. I have since 1995 been researching, and interviewing members of the Rani of Jhansi regiment across India, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Burma. I have found to my horror that the members of the Rani of Jhansi regiment never received any pension as freedom fighters in Southeast Asia. In India, they did eventually in the 70s. They never had a reunion. They were never acknowledged. People who run institutions in the name of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose did not take up the issue of the pension of Rani of Jhansi regiment members. When I went to Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand and Burma in 2004, I interviewed and recorded oral testimonies. I came back to India. I desperately wrote to the President of India. I went to Rashtrapati Bhavan. I met the press secretary. I wrote extensively. Janaki Thevar, who was the second person to command the Rani of Jhansi regiment, the first person was Lakshmi Swaminathan Sehgal. She set it up. But then Netaji sent her to Memyo in Upper Burma, where there was a nursing station because wounded Jawans were coming and she was a doctor. But Janaki Thevar is the one who who was present when the Red Cross was bombed. She was there taking out the already wounded soldiers, risking their lives. And when it was decided to disband the Rani of Jhansi regiment, I have oral testimonies recorded. I have a book, I have a film, but I have the recordings. The Ranis wrote a petition in their own blood. And Gauri Bhattacharya Sen went to Netaji, who was seated in a garage, which was camouflaged. She said, "We don't want to be disbanded. We want to go to the front. We want to risk our lives." And Netaji said, "When it is the time, I will tell you." And they were crying, and she said, "It was the saddest day of my life." When it was decided to disband the Rani of Jhansi regiment, first they went to the train, the tracks were bombed. They could not go. And then Netaji said, "Are you willing to walk?" And they were divided into two teams. One was led by Netaji and Janaki Thevar, and one was led by Janaki Bai of Siramban, who I've also interviewed extensively. Now, two Ranis, Stella and Josephine, are killed by strafe bombing. Does anyone know their names? Does anyone know that these women were killed? Does anyone know about that retreat in 21 days with the haversack cutting into their shoulder blades and the lack of food? All right. So, Rani of Jhansi regiment has never got its share of recognition, and they never got the pension. And we have actually lived under this colonial attitude that we women were always, doing under sati, and it was the great Britishers with their whatever. They gave us the education. If we had celebrated the Rani of Jhansi regiment, you will have your own indigenous role models. And it's not too late, because we are doing something, and we are planning an exhibition in ISC in August 2025. Now, the second thing I will end very briefly. I don't want to take up too much time, but since I have had the privilege and the honor of recording so many INA people, including Gandhinathan, who was a Tokyo cadet. And he gave the testimony that when that Habibur Rahman was present in that plane that crashed. He survived. He brought Netaji's ashes back. And in a solemn procession, the Tokyo cadets carried those ashes to Renkoji temple, where they are placed even today. Now, if anyone wants to dispute that those are not Netaji's ashes, the greatest soldier of India is living there, while you make a statue here in India Gate. If you want to dispute that these are not his ashes, please have a DNA test. I have met Anita Faf, with whom I went to. She was inaugurating a university in Haryana, and I went with her in a car with the springing tiger flag flying. I'm grateful that she had me in that car. During that journey, I asked her, "Are you willing? You're the daughter of Netaji. Are you willing for a DNA test?" She is willing. Why do we ignore the reality of the fact that the greatest soldier of India is sitting in Japan? So these are the 2 points I wish to make. Thank you very much, Sanjeev, for asking me to speak. And I very, 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 very sincerely hope and believe that after spending 25 years recording the INA and the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, we will at least give them their due share. Not one of them is alive, but for God's sake, let us not marginalize and invisibilize those people who worked for the freedom of India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you have any? No. Well, thank you. Thank you. No, it's quite true, and certainly it also is a excellent instance of how Netaji remains such a prominent issue in our public discourse today after so many years, and all the issues related to the INA, many of them remain to be resolved. I think that's a very, very valid point. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. My name is Nikhil. I have one small question about Rash Bihari Bose to Mukherjee sir. What is the connection between Hindu Mahasabha and Rash Bihari Bose? Because recently there have been some articles after the movie on Savarkar that Rash Bihari Bose was running a Japanese branch of Hindu Mahasabha or something.
Rashbihari Bose's political connections in Japan, I didn't have time to get into that. Political connections in Japan were all kind of with ultra nationalists in Japan of very right wing variety, and that had a resonance with what proponents of the Hindu Mahasabha were trying to do in trying to propagate in India at that time. So I don't think there is any direct connection in that sense, but there is a kind of an ideological resonance between what was happening with Rashbihari Bose and his ideological trajectory and in Japan and what was happening in India. That would be my brief answer to that. But this is an issue that needs greater research, I think.
Just to add to that, possibly the interface between Subhash Chandra Bose and Rash Bihari Bose was too brief for this aspect to be explored by either of them.
And they were more concerned with the INA rather than with Hindu Mahasabha or anything like that. There was a question.
Yes, thank you very much, professors. My name is Noriaki Abe. I'm a political minister of the Japanese embassy here in New Delhi. In Japan, both Boses are very well known, equally well known, and their biographies are well read, and both of them are loved and admired in many senses. However, the public discourse about two preeminent Indian independence leaders are always politically charged because Japan, in a sense, made a use of two of them for its purpose of establishing and enlarging its the so-called Great Asia prosperity zone, whereas they used Japan as the to achieve their own purpose, India's independence. So the discussions are always politically charged, and two of them were forgotten for a long time. And just 20 or 30 years ago, they revived in the Japanese public discourse in a positive manner. So my question is are they sort of a marriage of convenience, marriage of convenience between Japan and two leaders, was criticized, morally criticized in the post-war India's public discourse? Is it criticized for the moral reasons? And if the assessment of the public discourse in India changed, what are the political backgrounds or the reasons for revisions of their roles and their missions? Thank you.
So I want to add a third Indian to that roll call of honor that you just mentioned, which consists of the two Boses. I'm sure you know of a gentleman called Radha Vinod Pal, who in the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal gave the dissenting judgment. And I won't be wrong, I think, correct me if I am, he's equally a part of the Indian pantheon in Japan with the two Boses. He's up there. And may not have been an act of great physical courage, as in the case of the two Boses, but it was an act of great moral courage in that atmosphere, post-war atmosphere, to actually write that judgment and give that judgment. To answer your substantive question, even in the 1940s, when Bose, the younger Bose, was actively engaged in forging an alliance with Japan, and through Japan, the Axis powers, there was a counter discourse to that, led by Nehru, who was a committed anti-fascist. From the moment fascism emerged in Europe, he was an anti-fascist from the 1920s, when he first encountered fascism in 1925-26, when he was in Europe. So that discourse was there. And Nehru also admitted that this was a marriage of convenience on the part of Bose. In the case of the elder Bose, I don't think it was so much of a matter of marriage of convenience. I mean, where else could he have gone? I mean, if he was really to evade arrest, as it were, from the colonial police. So, in fact, in a sense, Japan was a natural choice for him to get there. And so the counter discourse, I think, existed very much. In fact, it is died down now because I think more attention is now being given as a kind of counter tendency. More attention is now being given to this, what should I say, the armed insurrection side of the Indian national movement rather than the Gandhian part of it. So people no longer think in terms of marriage of convenience or anything like that. This was just another way of getting independence.
Thank you.
Can I just say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Don't you think, Professor, that Netaji Bose laid the first seeds for non-alignment policy, because he followed that whichever power was good for India to achieve its freedom, he sided with them, and he went out of his way to travel all the way. So don't you think the first non-alignment seeds were raised by him?
I don't see how that is non-aligned. In fact, he was very strongly aligned to one side. It can't be non-aligned. He was not keeping a neutral position on either of the two sides. He was choosing a side.
Yes.
My name is Praveen Davar. I run a small paper called The Secular Savior, but I'm an ex-army officer whose late father met Netaji in 1936 or 1937 in Darjeeling. Having said that...
In Darjeeling?
In Darjeeling, yeah.
Okay, when he was actually a prisoner.
1936 or 37,
one
of those years. And Sagri Chhabra, I agree with her, and we should, I think, all go out of our way to ensure that the Rani of Jhansi regiment, they get their pension, because I am surprised that if the INA soldiers got their pension, however late, how come Rani of Jhansi has been left out? We will take up the matter, and we'll certainly try, not at my personal level, at a higher level, we'll try and prevail upon the government that they should get pension, there's no doubt. The second thing, sir, is about these ashes of Netaji. I think it is crystal clear that he did die. I've also written a couple of articles. I've written a book also. He did die in the air crash. I don't know why nobody is taking an initiative. Somebody has to do it. But some of these people in politics, it suits them that this controversy is kept alive. So they are not going to listen. So I think the pressure has to come basically because you belong to Bengal. The people of Bengal have to put up this pressure to get Netaji's ashes back. That is very, very important. It's absolutely right that he's lying there and the statue is here. We must bring him back. Thank you.
you. Well, thank you very much. And yes, please.
Hi, Professor. Good afternoon. I had the privilege to hear you when I was in school in Calcutta in Modern High School for Girls. You had come about 8 years ago. And at that time, you had just published your Nehru and Bose Two Parallel Lives book. So, and that made such an impact on me and a few of my friends who've gone on and done PhDs and stuff in history. So, I just wanted to tell you that. But, as someone who's been in Calcutta her whole life and, is from Bengal, I feel like a lot of these characters from history are just irrelevant to, they've just been forgotten and put at the back burner for some reason. I don't think there's anything actively happening about preserving that kind of memory that we have, the legacy that we have, and the kind of contributions that these people have made to the struggle. So, because Raj Bihari, the only context I have of him is Raj Bihari Avenue in.
It's not the same Raj Bihari Bose.
Oh, it's not the same?
It's Raj Bihari Ghosh.
Okay.
Who was a very eminent scientist, actually.
Okay, imagine that.
And he made an endowment to Calcutta University.
Yeah, so the ignorance
Raj
is
Bihari
quite
Bose
high,
is not
as you can
remembered
see.
even in Bengal.
Yeah, it's very high ignorance even right now. But just wanted to understand, like, is there anything that can be done in terms of, maybe revisiting the history books, or because the Japanese gentleman tells us that it's very relevant to Japan, it's still not relevant to us at all. So where are we going wrong, and what can be done to just edit this?
One response I had in mind when you were speaking is that the greatest opposition of the DNA test on the ashes in Rekoji temple comes from Bengal. Sanjeev will actually bear me out on this. The forward bloc opposes it.
Because they want to believe, they
want to believe that he's still there somewhere, whether it be in some cave in the Himalayas or in Siberian exile or whatever. It helps them to keep this going. So the opposition comes from there. And, I'm sorry to say this about somebody I really respected and loved. I'm really shocked that Lakshmi Saigal didn't take up the issue as a very eminent public figure about her own regiment, that they were not receiving any pension. I mean, I didn't know it. Thank you for that piece of information. Yeah, I will certainly read.
But would you have a response? Did Lakshmi Saigal ever raise this point? Or if she did not, why she did not? Or did you interview her on this?
I have interviewed Lakshmi Sehgal not once but several times across the years. So, but I don't want to comment on this, please.
Okay. No,
but I just want to say one thing. No, it won't be fair. Okay.
Yeah.
Because she has children who are alive. I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, I know that.
But Subhashini, she said at a meeting in Netaji Center in Calcutta when Janaki Thevar raised this, then how can she's not an Indian citizen? Because these Ranis were there, based in Malaysia now. They were in Singapore.
How is that relevant?
No, it's very sad, and it's all politics. It's all politics. Finally, we marginalize people there because certain people wish to project that they had done it all, and that is what is in our DNA. We don't acknowledge the contribution of women. We don't acknowledge the contribution of Dalits. We don't acknowledge the contribution of the poor. Thank you.
No, to get back to your question, I mean, the only thing we can do is to continue to research and write and bring out as many facets of history that we can possibly do in one or a collective lifetime.
And I think in that context, IIC's decision to have this theme, this Kalpvriksh as a theme, is a very important contribution, because otherwise these things won't have come out. I mean, because, when professor speaks or when, you expect to do some research deeper, then these things come out. So I think it's a continuous process. So
I think on that note, we can close because, and again, thank Professor Mukherjee for focusing so much on the forgotten Bose. And also thank Sanjeev Chopra for his very, very interesting and useful comments. May I request the President of the IIC, Ambassador Shyam Saran, to make a few closing remarks?
Thank you, Raghavan. I'm very happy that Sanjeev has has at least acknowledged the role of the ISC. Thank you very much. Nothing much to say. I mean, this has been a fascinating afternoon. I just wanted to in a non-serious way, refer to some of the kind of, coincidental connections which, emerge in our life as diplomats. You mentioned your experience in Singapore, where you came across some of the people from the INA. I had experience of this in 3 different locations. One was when I was in Japan. Of course, Japan was the base for the INA. Just before she died, I met the widow of Rash Bihari Bose, and their family is very much there. But you mentioned about a meal that they had. Yeah, well, I don't know whether it is true, but there used to be an ex-INA soldier there who had started a restaurant there called Nair's Cafe. And Nair's Cafe was famous all over Japan because it served very good Indian food. And he claims that it was in his restaurant that both the Boses had actually had a meal. So that's one little anecdote. Then the one of the members of the Japan-India Association was Mishmi-san. You might know him. And he was he was a liaison for the INA in Japan. And he had, incredible stories to tell about both Rash Bihari Bose and Netaji Bose. So there is a lot of history which has not been written about what Rash Bihari Bose, for example, was doing in Tokyo. I used to get little bits and pieces, but it was actually a very fascinating story. Then, Rinpoche Temple. So thanks to the controversy, whether or not the ashes there are Netaji Bose's ashes, the instructions from the government of India to the embassy was that the ambassador would not go for the annual, memorial ceremony, but the number 2 will go. So I was number 2. So the 3 years I was in Tokyo, I used to go to the Renkoji temple when there used to be a memorial ceremony. But what was fascinating about that memorial ceremony was that even those days, there was something like at least 15 ex-Japanese army, generals and soldiers in full, military regalia with all their medals. They would line up in the courtyard of the temple to pay homage to the memory of Netaji Bose. Every year I had that experience. So I used to be the only representative from India, but you had about 15 representatives from the Japanese army who would be present. Then I was posted to, Mauritius. And in Mauritius, you would not expect that there would be connections with the INA. One day, a lady called Tilak contacted me, and she said that she was a grand niece of Rash Bihari Bose. And she then came and, had huge number of photographs of the Rash Bihari Bose family in Bengal and from Japan, she said, there were great stories in our family about his experiences, about his time in Japan. So all the way from from Bengal to Japan to Mauritius. And last, of course, not the least, was a posting in Myanmar, in Rangoon, which was one of the major, centers. And I think the maximum number of places associated with Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA are actually there in Burma. So you have an old school which used to serve as the headquarters of the INA. The training ground, the school yard used to be the training ground for the INA. I was taken to a very old traditional Japanese Burmese house, which was the place of residence of Subhash Chandra Bose during the time that he was in Rangoon. And then there is a building of the Azad Hind Bank, which was taken over by the Burmese and is also still a bank. So there is a large number of places associated with the INA. And lastly, about pensions. So large number of them had come to the embassy saying that they were in very, very, very difficult circumstances. They used to get a grey passport, which enabled them only to travel to India and back to Burma because they were all stateless. They had no status as such. So they were with these grey passports, and again, in very difficult circumstances. I am happy to tell you that there were a few women as well amongst those who contacted us. And we were able to get the government of India to give a one-time grant of 50,000 rupees to each of those families, at least those who approached us in Burma. 50,000 rupees may not seem very much, but for anybody staying in Burma, converted into local money was a decent amount. So we were able to at least extend some assistance to them. But there is still a very large group of people who are descendants of the INA. So as I said, very strange coincidences all over all over the country. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I may be permitted to add, there are many people who are freedom fighters who were stateless who I met in Burma, and now they must have expired, but their families and grandchildren remain stateless. That's another issue that can be taken up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.